Hi everybody, this is Kurt Gartner for VFXHaiku.com, and today we're going to take a look at some just relatively simple compositing tricks that you can sort of use for whatever kind of projects you're working on. I'm going to go over a couple sort of just really general techniques that I kind of use in pretty much every little project I put together. And the project we're going to look at is the Super Crate Box trailer I made for the Winitron 1000. So let's just take a look at this trailer and we can sort of see what exactly is going on inside of here. I'll just turn down the audio a little bit. So basically what this trailer was, the goal of this trailer anyway, was to introduce this new game that we have on this indie game arcade machine. This is sort of my side project lately. And we had all these VFX shots that we wanted to do, and you're sort of seeing some of these here. We basically have people sort of interacting with some of these like CG characters from the game. So we went to this bar and we shot a whole bunch of footage, and basically it took me about 5 days to kind of put this whole thing together. So a whole bunch of shots here. They all use pretty much the same techniques. So that's basically the last VFX shot here up until the end. So I'll just let this play through. And this is the other major VFX shot. This is about a day of rotoscoping here to get both of these guys to sort of interact with each other like this. Maybe not a day. It was probably about like 6 hours maybe of rotoscoping. Anyway, not a big deal, but it was kind of fun. I might show that off in another tutorial. But basically what I wanted to sort of look at here was these main shots here, where there's these characters sort of integrated with these plates. And obviously they're pixelated characters from the game, but they do kind of look like they actually sit into the plate. And that's what I want to really talk about here. And we're just going to use this shot here as an example, because this has pretty much every element in it. And we can sort of see some of the techniques that I was using here. Okay, so here we are inside of the After Effects comp. Now, I'm just going to sort of zoom out here so we can take a look at it. But this comp is pretty massive. There's 118-ish layers, and this is just the main comp, and then there's another couple comps after this, and each one of these shots is a comp unto itself. So I'm just going to do a quick RAM preview here of just this one shot, which is what we're going to look at, and that's basically just this element right here. So if I dive into this pre-comp, and I'll just preview what we have here, you can kind of see the whole thing. So basically what's happening here? Okay, we've got a CG box, we've got these CG explosions, we've got CG characters, and we've got our star here, Marlin, just kind of appearing out of nowhere in the middle of this jump. So how did we do all these things? And let's just start with the live action plate, because that's probably the simplest thing of all here. So I'm just going to isolate this element, and if I just preview it, basically he just pops in out of nowhere, and you can kind of see that there's a clip that just starts right here. So I've kind of got him mid-jump, and I'm just using this half of the footage. And the other half basically is being used as the left-hand side. And the reason I'm doing that is because I wanted this sort of black part on the edge here, this kind of, I don't know, that's out of focus. Basically, it's supposed to be a person, even though you can't really see that. But if you look in this take here, if I just turn off this mask, you'll notice that it's moved over a little bit. And compositionally, I like the way it looked in this one a bit better. So I just wanted to use 1/2 of that piece of footage. So that's why it's masked off there, like so. So if we take a look at this footage, let me just reveal this. Duke. And reveal in Finder. Sorry, I always forget what that is. So if we just take a look at this piece of footage here, this is basically what I started to work with. So I was going to do a rack focus to this, but there just wasn't time for it in the shot. So that kind of got cut out. And so here we basically just have our clean plate, which is the background. And then Marlin just walks into position.
Maybe do a thing where you're sort of like jump in, you're like that.
You love that direction. Yeah. So there you go. That's the take that got used right there. So basically we just kind of like cut into it right about there. And then he just falls into position, and that's really it. So it's just a simple matter of taking this part and overlaying this part right there over top of it. Really, really simple. So that's the background. And now we've got, let's focus on the characters. So these little floaty guys, they're actually pretty simple. These guys are just stills. So let me see if I can just find one here. Yeah, this guy right here. If I just zoom in on him. It's just a still image that's just being moved around the shot with two simple keyframes. There's not really a heck of a lot going on there. If I open up this pre-comp, here, let me just go inside. It's just a still of this sort of skull-looking thing. All the pixel art in this game was drawn by this guy named Paul Veer, and he was able to supply me with the original like PNGs and animated GIFs of the stuff they used in game. So that was pretty awesome. So he just supplied me this, and I'm literally just, where's the comp here? Yeah, just moving it around just with two positional keyframes and just putting a little bit of a curve in between them. And that's all there is to that. So the green characters themselves, though, they have a little bit more to them. So if I go into this, now they're animated, and so these were supplied to me as animated GIFs, but for whatever reason After Effects would just choke when I tried to import them, so I had to convert them all to animated PNG sequences to get the alpha channel. So once I got that and got them imported, they're basically just looped to infinity, and they just keep going and going and going and going. And so they're just placed in the scene, and in this shot, since it's a locked off shot, I didn't have to track them or anything like that, and I'm just kind of dumping them in there. So the next two things that are in this shot here are basically this 3D box, and then we've got these explosions. So let's just take a look at the 3D box because it's also pretty simple setup. So if I go into here, this is the pre-comp for the 3D box. So I'm going to open that guy up, and basically I've got my camera and a light all set up in here. So basically the entire box is just sort of being set up in this separate pre-comp, so I don't have to worry about having cameras and lights and stuff in my main scene. So the light basically just gives it a little bit of shading. If I turn the light off and on there, you can kind of see it just sort of shades it a little bit. And when the box gets to around this side here, this side goes into shadow, which I kind of liked. It just sort of made it a little bit more dynamic than having the box 100% lit from all sides all the time. Just made it look like it's actually in the scene a little bit. So the box itself is also just really, really simple. It is literally just a still image like this, scaled up to fit the size of this comp, and then just put on all four. I guess there's 6 of these, right? 1, 2, or whatever, to make this box here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that makes sense. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, because I don't have an actual bottom to the box. It is since you never see it, there is no point to actually put it in there. So they're all just lined up by eye, and they're just kind of made into this one little box. And once I have that as a pre-comp, when I go into the box pre-comp, I can just take this whole thing and just put 2 rotational keyframes on it, and then the whole 3D box will rotate, so I don't have to worry about parenting or doing anything like that. It's basically just taking that whole comp and then just rotating the whole thing at once. So that's really nice and simple. So if we go back into this comp, there we go, and that's basically what it looks like. So the last thing we have here are these smoke particles. And I'm just going to RAM preview this really quick so we can see it. Okay, so here's what these particles look like in motion. And it's pretty simple. There isn't really a lot going on with them either. They're done with particular. So let's just open up the smoke particle pre-comp here, and we can take a look inside of this. So again, I'm using one of the sprites from the game, which is just a still. It's just this simple smoke particle here. So if I close that down, where was it again? This guy, smoke particles. So if I look in here, basically what's happening is the particles are just sort of going out and coming to rest and then slowly shrinking. So I'm not going to go into a huge tutorial of particular here. Yes, in this thing here. So basically, the way I'm making this happen to sort of like make them explode out and then shrink down is I'm using the size over life, and I'm also using air resistance. So the air resistance is what makes them stop moving. So if I put the air resistance at 0, the particles basically just go out forever. If I put it up to say like 10 or so, they'll get a bit of resistance and then kind of stop and then shrink. So I think it was at 18.5 is what I had before. So that was just the perfect amount, and I was basically just mimicking what I saw inside of the game in order to make that effect. And then in order to make them change size, I've just got size over life. So basically they're big, and then they kind of go right near the end of their life. And the life is set to half a second with like a 5% variance on it. So it's a really, really simple particle setup. This is one of the easier things or easier parts of the project to do. And yeah, that's basically it. And then it just kind of goes like that, and it looks like it's coming out of the game. So if I go back into, oh my God, there's so many pre-comps. Is this the one? This is the one. There we go. Oh, I have to re-render those smoke particles. I'll just let that happen here. Now that we've sort of got all the elements kind of like laid into the shot, what we need to do is kind of make them look like they actually sit in the plate. And the one, like when you're especially dealing with stuff like 8-bit pixel art, it doesn't generally mesh with live action footage because pixel art is so like 100% perfect, and it's like it's drawn on a computer, and it would obviously never exist in this scene. So we have to do what we can in order to kind of make it look like it's actually sitting there. And the first example that I'll use is probably the characters here. So let's just take a look at one of these. Well, we can take a look at this guy. Where's one of the walking characters? Let's use one of them. Yeah, let's take a look at this guy. So if we zoom right in on him, you can actually see that he's pretty blurry. And oh, I'm missing my colorista there, but that's just a simple color correction I was doing. But basically, the fast blur is what the main thing is here. I'm taking this and I'm actually blurring it considerably, and he is just moving left to right. So he's actually got motion blur applied to him too. If I turn off the motion blur and then turn off the fast blur, you can see how crisp he looks compared to the background. He just like really stands out. It doesn't look like he's in the shot at all. So combining the fact that he's moving, so basically having the motion blur turned on, that's the first step. That's where it gets him a little bit more mushy. And then the fast blur kind of just sets him in there even more. There's a couple other things I could have probably done, like the color correction here is actually disabled. That's my fault. But I could have added grain to him, but I actually didn't add any grain to the characters because they're relatively small in the scene and they're moving quickly. But I did add grain to some of the larger elements, like the smoke. Let's see if we can find a frame where that is, like right here, and the box itself. So maybe let's take a look at the box, because that is really got a bunch of stuff going on to it. So, oh, and most of that, it looks like it's happening in the other comp here. So I'm just going to dive into that. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so if I turn off all these effects, here's the box on its own. Looks 100% perfect. Looks like a really sharp CG element. And the first thing I'm doing, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but I'm adding an unsharp mask to actually generate like some artifacts along the side here. And the reason I'm doing that is basically because this footage that I took looks like it's a little bit sharp, and you can actually see if you zoom in here, you can kind of see some sharpening artifacts around the edges of the footage. So I was trying to mimic that in a sort of kind of subtle way. Like right now it looks way over the top, but that's because the other effects aren't applied on top of that. So if I go back into here, so I've got this unsharp mask, then I apply a bit of a fast blur, and that basically just defocuses the entire thing. So that kind of gets rid of a lot of those issues. If I turn off that unsharp mask, you can kind of see how just soft it looks. And then if I turn that back on, it kind of just adds a little bit of sort of like video-ish looking sharpening to the whole thing. And it kind of helped a little bit in the end. So the next thing I'm doing is I've got an exposure adjustment here. Again, I'm not going to turn on the colorista because it's a missing effect. And then I've got my grain, and basically the grain in here is to mimic the video noise that's in the footage. So I'm just going to turn this off just so you can see this, and then I'm going to go back into the main comp. And if you look, especially in the shadows here, you can see that there's a lot of compression artifacts, and there's just a lot of grain in the footage. And if I take the brightness of this and I boost it way up, you can see just how perfect and crisp this crate looks compared to this footage. So by turning on the grain, I'll just go back and do that, and then hopping back into this footage here, you can see it helps a little bit, but there's still a problem. These blacks are 100% black, and once I boosted the brightness of my footage, you can actually see that this stuff on the left here, if I just bring this back to 0, which looks black, if I bring up the brightness, it actually isn't black. It's got some red in it, and it's got all this noise that sort of comes out. But this doesn't look anything like that. And so what we need to do is we need to adjust the black levels of this box in order to match this stuff over here. And it's a really tiny adjustment, and some people just always skip this step, but it's something that it's sort of like one of those little 2 or 3% things that really helps sell the shot. And in order to do these kind of color corrections, I like to use Colorista. Now the reason I'm having all these Colorista missing things is because I built this on my PC, which only has Colorista 1, but my Mac actually has Colorista 2. So that's the reason I have to swap this. So I just redid this color correction really quick, and this is a little bit too much red probably, but just for the purposes of illustration, you can see that now that I've boosted the gamma basically on my shadows and tinted them a little bit more red, they're kind of not going 100% to black. And if I just bring the the value of the sort of the gain here to 0, and I sort of zoom into this corner, it's a really, really subtle difference. So if I turn this off, and that's what it looks like. If I turn it back on, you can kind of see it's just bringing it up a little bit and adding a little bit more red into it. And although that's really, really subtle, it really, really helps solidify that object into the shot. And I'm doing the same thing to these smoke particles as well. So if I just go into this guy, turn off all these effects, this is what it looks like straight out of the render. They're 100% sharp. Again, I'm doing a fast blur, adding some grain. And in this case, I'm posterizing this piece of footage too. And what that means is I'm sort of slowing down its frame rate. And the reason I'm doing that is because this footage was all shot at 30 frames a second. And most games, their animated characters don't run at a full fluid 30 frames a second. Usually it's maybe like 12 or 15 frames a second. So I'm actually reducing the frame rate of this footage to 20 frames per second. And that's going to change the look of it a little bit slightly here. And the last thing I'm doing again is I'm just adding that colorese to kind of boost the black levels and just add a little bit more red overall into that element. And so that's basically the last thing that happens inside of this pre-comp here. And if I go back into the main comp, you can see it looks a little bit different because I'm doing a global color correction to this entire thing. I've got an instance of Magic Bullet Mojo, which is sort of taking this whole thing and adding a little bit more of a blue-green tint to the whole thing. And then I've got a vignette applied to the outside edges, so it kind of just darkens down everything on the edge there. So that's pretty much all the little tricks. I mean, like the main thing to think about here when you're dealing with putting CG elements into a live action plate is you just need to match like a couple of things. One, try to match motion blur or try to match the blur level of your footage. Number 2, adjust the black levels to roughly match what's in your footage. And 3, if there's any noise or grain, match that as well. If you do those 3 things, that sort of gets you like 80% of the way there. And if those are basically like the minimum criteria that I would sort of say it takes to start getting a CG element to integrate it into the footage. I mean, in this case, I can get away with a lot because these characters are 100% self-illuminated. They're completely just like, they're not reacting to any of the lighting in the scene. There's none of that going on. And doing that kind of stuff would take it a lot further, but we didn't have a lot of time to do this, and I did this entire thing from beginning to end in I think it was 5 days or so. So that's basically it. If you guys have any questions about anything that's in here, just let me know and I'll try to cover it in a future tutorial. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.